Today I'm gonna be giving you a complete guide on how to approach the Queen's Gambit step by step, but there is not only that. In fact, my goal with this video is to completely change your perspective about how you approach the game of chess in general. So the main reason of why I'm saying that is because after d4, d5, now we play c4, the Queen's Gambit move, and more often than not, your opponent is gonna be going for the declined version. Don't worry, I'm gonna also explain what to do if they accept, and at the end of the video we will be going over the Slav. But on the declined, I recommend you take the pawn, and after they recapture, we have one of the most universal pawn structures in chess, the so-called Carlsbad structure. Now, what makes the Carlsbad so interesting is the fact that you can genuinely reach this from a variety of openings, like the Caro-Kann, let's say, Scandinavian, Nimzo-Indian, London system even, and the list goes on forever. If you play any of the openings that I have just mentioned, I promise that all the knowledge is gonna apply just fine. Now, please give me a little bit of your precious time and enjoy one of the most valuable videos that I have ever made. Alright, everybody managed to get a white game. Gonna open up with d4 and against d5. We're gonna be going for the opening that you really requested, and I'm referring to the Queen's Gambit. And first of all, it is important to understand that this is not a real gambit. Okay, it is just like a fake gambit. So c4, Queen's Gambit. If they take, you just want to play e3, and the most common trap is that if they try to hang on to the pawn by, let's say, playing b5, first you want to go a4. Their only move to try to somehow keep the pawn is c6. But after a, b, c, b, there is this very famous trap that you can play queen f3, and notice that there is no way for black to actually save the rook. So for this reason, this is a fake gambit. It's just a normal opening. Just like a fake taxi, it is not a real taxi. So again, e6, I'm just gonna recommend you go for takes. If they play either Slav or e6, I recommend you go for the exchange variation, which, by the way, when you play c4, this already creates a threat of taking, therefore provoking the enemy queen to develop very early, and we get to attack it with a knight and grab tempo in the center. So for this reason, most of the times black is forced to defend on d5. So we take. Usually he's going to be taking with the pawn. There's no really other sensible move, and I'm going to be playing knight to c3. Here they have a choice. c6 or knight f6 are the most common moves. Yeah, we see c6, just reinforcing the pawn on d5. This is a bit of a committal decision, since sometimes it could be interesting for black to keep ideas of perhaps against some setups to play c5, like usually specifically when white tries to more of an aggressive long castle idea. c5 is usually the way to counter it. But if you play c6, you're gonna be losing a tempo. Anyways, it's not really our goal. So here, you have many moves. You can start with knight f3, you can play bishop f4, and I guess queen c2 is also interesting. I'm gonna play bishop to f4. I would have done that even on knight f6. Notice that knight f6 is main move, and you can play bishop g5. But I want to get you started with this little idea, since so far we have looked up so much normal London system and Jobava London. I find it quite unique and interesting to have the Queen's Gambit with the bishop on f4. And it's actually a pretty topical line in our time. And the way I'm going to be playing this, I'm going to approach this in a very simple way. And first of all, notice that queen b3 here is not really going to give us much. I think opponent has simple way to defend, simply queen b6. So usually on bishop f5 early, you want to watch out for queen b3, could give you a winning position with a double attack. Not the case here though. So I'm just going to play e3. Expecting knight f6 or bishop d6. Both of the moves are quite reasonable. We see knight to f6, and here I think we have a choice between two interesting ideas. Actually, three interesting ideas. What I'm gonna end up playing, I think I'm gonna stick with a simple approach just to show you kind of the typical positional squeeze for this pawn structure. But additionally, against this, you have knight e2, knight g3. Could be interesting to try to use the bishop as a target. As well as, I think I noticed computer quite likes this idea of playing Jobava fashion, even in Queen's Gambit, and then you push. But I'm just gonna stick with the trade, okay? If you are here for the Queen's Gambit, probably you're looking for a easy, simple, positional chess. So expecting him to trade and then play bishop d6. I'm gonna be trading both bishops. He should go bishop d6, bishop e7 is just a bit too passive for no reason. Yeah, no, this, I guess, common mistake. After this, I would have exchanged and would have played knight f3 castle with a typical plan to go rook a b1 and then look for the minority attack. But on bishop to e7, I think we can just continue developing. We have a choice between knight f3, or if I'm afraid of knight f3, knight h5, I could start with the move h3. Just, you know, making sure we have an additional square. So yeah, knight f3, knight there, bishop e5 at the very least. I think that's reasonable. I'm gonna play h3 though, just kind of like a nice useful move, preparing a loft, and I think we'll stick with the most natural move. Sometimes knight e2 is interesting. That's kind of like the modern plan to go f3, e4. However, I don't think it's really anything special here. It's perhaps quite double-edged. Definitely, I guess you can play like that, but I want you to show the queenside squeeze. So I'm gonna go knight f3 castle, just keeping it very simple. I'm not really playing for like an opening advantage, like even my opponent, I think he got quite a relatively safe position and sound. Like if you look at it with the computer, probably it's gonna be around 0. But what it is so nice about this pawn structure is that white moves are so simple and the initiative kind of plays itself, as you will see, that eventually it will become pretty difficult for my opponent to make moves and therefore start making mistakes. So yeah, knight d7, I'm gonna play the very typical move, okay? This is really the key position of the game, and you should really try to take a mental screenshot of this position, because you're gonna get this in most of your games, no matter what. And the main point is to try to attack by using your pawns. Like usually low rated players would just try to calculate something concrete and try to do something with their pieces, which is not really what the structure is calling for here. In such, let's say, close positions, pieces are not that effective. So the pawn break will be with b5, just because c6 is the only target that we could really play for. You could argue that h6 is a hook, but that will also weaken our own king, so that's definitely very risky. So I'm just gonna go rook b1. Now, typically he should go a5, trying to slow me down a little. Not sure if he will or not. Okay, he just takes the passive approach, which is fine too. On a5, what it's really important to understand is that, well, yes, we do want the minority attack, so a3 is kind of natural, threatening b4. But make sure not to allow this kind of fixation, I guess. Is that a word, fixation? Not allow a4, fixing your queen side. That's like stopping the pawn so you can never push b4 because of the en passant. So after, let's say, a5, I would have started queen c2, taking under control a4 square, rook fc1, and then a3 b4. So he cannot go for the fixation. Hopefully you guys remember it that way. So I'm just gonna play b4 here. I could have started rook c1 as well. For him, usually it's interesting to try out something like knight b6 to c4. Also, it could be quite interesting for black to perhaps go b5. Generally b5, it's fine for him only if he's in time with knight b6, knight c4. So yeah, let's see. Not many people actually, I think, play b5. So yeah, that will generally just allow us to build this monster squeeze, a4, b5. And the whole goal of this is, well, we just want to take on c6. He takes back and we have a weak pawn to play for. And kind of as a side note, trading queens is always in our favor. Okay, opponent finds knight b6 move, it's pretty good. So I'm not gonna allow him to play knight c4, I'm just gonna do knight e2. Notice that I'm trying to look for his threat and my move becomes easy. Plays bishop to d6. Okay, I don't really have much of a choice other than to exchange. I don't want to allow double pawns. There's no way to benefit from that here. So I'm just gonna exchange, and before I even start pushing more, I feel like it could be very useful to have rook c1 into the game. And yes, I believe my opponent should still be fine, but my main argument is that at some point our position will become easier to play. The way I see things now, we could probably go a4, b5, but additionally there might be an interesting idea to play a4, a5 if allowed, and after knight d7 to try to play this, let's say, knight to a4, hoping for knight c5, and if knight takes on c5, take with the b pawn, we have target on b7. So these are the two main plans. And now he plays the move rook fd8, which I'm not super sure of. That's a bit of a strange move. Like normally the rook belongs onto the semi-open file, and sometimes my opponent should even consider maybe moves such as g5, g4, or g5, king g7, try to create some kind of play on the king side. Otherwise, rook fd8. Otherwise, he may be getting in a passive position. But okay, let's see, a4. I think playing this type of position, especially in low-rated games, can be very efficient because it's forcing your opponents to do something that they really have a hard time with. And I'm talking about they need to play waiting moves, or they need to just stay solid. So usually the way beginner's brain is wired, you kind of always want to do something, and most of the times it just leads to yourself ruining your position against the queen's gambit. So okay, he plays queen e6. Queen e6, not really having any threats. I can play b5, ab, ab. That's looking pretty juicy. I can also do a5, knight d7, knight a4. And then play knight c5. Problem is that even when I get the knight to c5, maybe he can just play rook b8 and stay passive. So I'm gonna go for like standard pawn break. I'm gonna go b5 and just playing our minority attack. And here he has two ways. He took the way most people would do. However, I want to really draw your attention to the fact that, well, potentially a very strong sequence for black is c takes and then a5. And this way, not only that he's not getting a weak pawn, but he's also getting decent counterplay with the outside passer. So I think that's usually mandatory for him, but it's a very kind of advanced trick. So now after AB, he has no way to, let's say, avoid a weak pawn. Perhaps another interesting maneuver that comes to mind now, maybe knight e2, knight f4, activating the knight, targeting the queen, and opening up rook's path towards the c6 pawn, which is really our main target in the position. Notice how black has to react against a very unpleasant threat of bc, because bc simply loses the knight. Hello there. So you see how effective these rooks are, like, really placed. So yeah, in case you're watching me normally for the London system, or let's say the Karo Khan, I think even this type of videos could be very effective for you, just because they kind of have the same pawn structure, which is the Carlsbad structure. We get this minority attack, and make sure, as long as your king is safe, we're gonna be getting risk-free, let's say, initiative on the queen side. Is it gonna be enough for a win? Maybe not always. As long as we get a pleasant, easy game, that's kind of all that matters. So alright, interesting. Opponent plays knight to c4, trying to solve this with active moves. Of course, first instinct is to take the knight, but then I notice DC attacks my queen, and I don't really like my queen to be attacked. Therefore, I'm considering BC. After BC, I think he's forced to take, and then after knight takes, pawn takes, my queen is getting attacked, but at least he has double pawns. So I think that's pretty good. I don't know, what do you guys think? I think that's really good. I'm gonna go takes. He can, of course, maybe throw in intermediate move, but I don't really mind that since he still has the weak pawn on the c file. And alright, here I also just considered for a second perhaps interesting move, knight c e4. A bit fancy and unnecessary, I know, but I was just kind of wondering maybe something like that could be interesting. Because after like knight d2, we have knight f6, queen f6, and then queen d2. And after knight e4, if pawn takes, then queen c4, we have a bigger attack. The only thing that's maybe needs a mention is knight e4, rook a3. How is that? Because else I would really like to play this. I can go knight f6 check and then rook c3. Rook takes, queen takes. Maybe knight d2, queen d2. I think he kind of has enough pieces to defend there. So yeah, I think I should just keep it very simple, take and give him double pawns and just try to win the pawn on c4 now. Notice, by the way, how nicely our pawn structure is. We have only one pawn island and he's already having issues with double isolated pawns. Now question where to go with the queen. I could do queen f1, trying to keep an eye on this pawn, and perhaps preparing knight e2, knight f4. Yeah, I quite like this idea. Queen d1. Not a huge fan of queen d1 because it still allows c5, so I'm just gonna go f1. I think here if he plays precise, he may be able to, let's say, get a reasonable position still. Maybe I'm like underestimating our position a little bit. Could be that as well. White may already be winning. But yeah, we have no risk. And if we manage to maneuver this knight, like let's say knight e2, knight f4, or maybe just knight d1, well, that's enough to win us the game. If we win the c4 pawn, we're gonna have completely winning endgame. So he plays rook to b8, which was not one of my main candidates here, because I was thinking we could simply take and then move the knight. Perhaps even knight a4 could be interesting. Now this is available because no more rook on the a file. And knight a4, rook b4, knight c5 seems pretty nice. I quite like that. Additionally, knight b1, but then knight e4, he's pretty active. So I'm just gonna do knight e4. Okay, we only have 30 seconds left, but we do have 5 seconds increment each move, which is what I normally recommend, and should be enough not to get flagged. But yeah, I think you guys get the idea how this kind of games are going. We're just starting to play the squeeze now. I don't have enough to take the pawn yet, and also e4 is always kind of weakening both pawns, so I think I just need to get closer with my queen. So target the rook, and then he will probably go b2, but then queen c3 is kind of like a cold shower for my opponent. Targeting the rook, and then he has no way to keep the pawn defended. This is kind of like one of the nicest advantages to have as white, because we are just better kind of in the long run because the pawn is weak. It's not like, let's say, when you have the initiative. The tricky part with the initiative is like you need to act quick. If you don't use the momentum, then your advantage will kind of dissolve and disappear. But when you have such a nice long-term target, you can play like pretty much anything and still be better. So it just gives you kind of like a very nice margin to, let's say, play not very precise, but make just useful improving moves. Try not to hang your queen and you'll probably get out of this elo. What can I tell you? Quality chess advice. So, knight e4. Now, knight e4 is hitting these pieces, so I think I need to take. Make sure to remember that knight does move backwards, at least sometimes. And yeah, I'm quite happy with this trade, even though, yeah, still it's only one pawn. I'm forcing his rook to become quite passive. Ah, he tries that, rook b1. That's interesting. Because here you can easily blunder queen c6, because there is queen takes, and you're pinned. But I think you can simply take and then go king up. I think I'm just gonna do that. I think this should be technical win in the queen endgame. He has like one check on b8, but we have g3, and he has queen b2. I think we have simple path to stop the checks and then promote the pawn. Like I was a little bit afraid of this, but I don't think it should really be a problem. I think, yeah, he goes for it, but perhaps best try was for him to keep the pawn. But now after queen e1 we can take, and queen f2 I can even, let's say, bring the queen back and defend everything. Yeah, that's pretty nice. Also, even stronger, give check first, and then not queen e4, but queen f3. So notice that with this check, I made the f7 pawn softer. So if he wants to, let's say, avoid the trade, perhaps needs to play maybe queen a2, keep that under defense. Like all the endgames are lost. Any king and pawn endgame with an extra pawn is an easy win. And yeah, now I think I can start grabbing. I can give a check as well. I don't want to grab because I feel like I could potentially use this pawn to give me a shelter for the queen. So I'm just going to give him check, and then I'm going to try to promote my pawn. I think here the plan is just to keep pushing and try to make sure we avoid perpetual, which honestly should be really doable in normal circumstances. Hopefully I'm not going to blunder perpetual in time scramble. So just d5. King f8 I'm not really afraid of. We simply go queen e5 and keep pushing. Queen e5 d6. So here again I had the option to go check and take on f7, but queen e3, and then yeah, maybe it's still a win, but I just feel like naturally the more pawns you trade, the more you help your opponent on the defense, so to speak. I think that's like a good thing to guide yourself with. So here I decided to keep those pawns, and yeah, g6 I can check, and or I can play queen e5. I'm gonna go check just because I'm trying to provoke the king there. Else I was taking with check, and now I'm winning half a tempo. It's just about these little tricks to be more efficient. Now notice that even d6 comes with tempo because I'm threatening to mate, but the position is probably lost anyways because I'm about to get the second queen. Just need to be careful. Here, in order to have an easy win, I should get my queen to c7 when I push. Else he may still have perpetual ideas. So I'm gonna give check. Now, if d7, he has queen d6. So missing counterplay. Shouldn't do that. I'm gonna give check, repeat the position once, and then I'm gonna play maybe queen c5. Is that appropriate? No, queen d4 is just, I think, very strong. If queen d4, pawn takes king f8, king g3, king e8, king f4, critical move, king d7, king e5. Should be winning with an extra pawn. So yeah, queen d4 was very strong move there, and now we're just in time to bring the king, and well, this gets a little bit tricky, but I think we should still be okay, because we'll ultimately turn onto his pawns. I have a feeling. It's very important that we have extra pawn though. So yeah, he plays h4. Now I can do g3. I can do h4. Yeah, h4 is strong move here because g5 I take, and then king e5 should be a win. Yeah, g5. Yeah, just take and king e5. I'm just gonna stick with intuition. And it's important that we're gonna have king in front of the pawn. Yeah, so king f5, h3, I don't think it helps. So yeah, this should be an easy win now. Okay, I think even though it looked a little bit tricky in the king and pawn endgame, I think it was completely winning. So now the point is, don't play g4, g5 and that, because his king is gonna get in front, but try to keep your king like that. So it's important to, yeah, do this. I think even start g4 is fine. Just get your, as long as you get your king in front, should be a win. So yeah, now king g6, typical concept of shouldering. And yeah, I think I can just push king f8 and then king h7. This one is pretty easy. But anyways, king on g6 was winning without that. Regardless, it's a typical position. So, are you still with me? Kind of like a long game, kind of like a long squeeze. I know. Is this how precisely you need to play in order to win against like a 1500 guy online? Well, not really. I would say my opponent played pretty well for his rating. But what you want to understand is that always we had zero risks of losing. So if you're looking for like a risk-free kind of game with the white pieces, where you don't need to calculate a lot, but mainly make positional decisions, I think the Queen's Gambit is a great choice for you. I mean, still, I would give Jabava London a try if this is your first time on the channel. I have a bunch of interesting videos on that, but just saying, okay, it is up to you. You play whatever, whatever you like. Okay, opponent finally realizes that this is kind of it, so just resigns. I think everything was well played. I'm just curious about this moment when I played Queen d4, because I really pulled the trigger in that endgame. So yeah, Queen f3, check. Now, just to show you, I guess it wasn't the best to take on f7. Yeah, Queen e3. Notice computer eval, how much it changes. It's almost like a 0. So I felt like it's critical to keep the pawn and play d5. And yeah, then we had this critical idea d6, and now okay, Queen e7. Oh yeah, Queen e7 was pretty strong. Oh yeah, Queen e7, and we're covering all the checks. That was easy. I should have spotted Queen e7. I wonder how is Queen d4. Apparently, opponent could have defended in this endgame. I don't really understand how though. Like we have d5. How is this a draw? Am I not just like coming this way? Wow. How is this a draw? All right, he has this. Oh, and now h4 only move to draw. Okay, I mean, this is like very, very complicated. Yeah, I mean, just kind of like a last second decision here, Queen d4. If this works, it's like he resigns and we get the win. But way cleaner, just play Queen e7. Yeah, like he's not in time with anything. Like this, you just play Queen c7. Okay, this is exactly the idea that I told you guys I should be aiming for. And I didn't do it. This is so annoying for me because I was supposed to find Queen e7 and not with threat of pushing. I mean, maybe threat of pushing too. But biggest threat was to play Queen c7 actually. Because the whole point is that on Queen c7, oops, sorry here. Whatever he does d7, we cover all the checks and then we promote. So he has absolutely no counterplay. This was the key. This would have been the key idea to actually play this properly. And I'm like really kicking myself because I believe the other part of the game was kind of perfectly played. Hopefully you guys find this game quite instructive. I think this is like a very clear picture of what kind of structure you can get if you are playing Queen's Gambit. So yeah, hopefully if you're just considering to pick this line into your repertoire, this game gives you a good idea of if there's anything interesting for you. So with that being said, I think we can move on to the following game. Alright everybody, getting a white game. Gonna be trying out your favorite opening. Gonna be playing d4 and then we are gonna be going for the Queen's Gambit. Yes, you've heard it right. Beth Harmon-like. But opponent starts with c6 on the first move. Perhaps just trying to play the Caro-Kann. However, he may not know the news that against d4, you cannot really play the Caro-Kann. So this is technically a Slav. He's playing the Slav defense. Now, against the Slav defense, I will recommend you, if you're just getting started, to stick with c takes on d5 against both the Slav and let's say if instead of this he had e6, the Queen's Gambit declined, I recommend exchange variation against both. I think it's easiest. So just gonna start by taking. He has to take it back with a pawn, otherwise if queen takes, this is common mistake. You're able to develop with tempo and then get a massive pawn center with a big edge. So yeah, now just gonna develop the knights. Knights will usually develop on their natural squares. Here already black could make a common mistake to go knight c6. Not a huge mistake, it's just like a small inaccuracy, which yeah, I guess you can try to punish if you really want to, because I think e4 is quite annoying there to deal with, because de d5 is becoming kind of sketchy. The knight doesn't have a good square, but already I think our opponent may have made a typical move. So move 4, it's very likely that he already lost the game. Now, you pause the video and try to find out why. Okay, and this is a very important theme, because when you are playing this kind of like c4 openings, notice how your queen has extra room, and when the bishop lands onto f5, you need to realize what happens, because yes, on one hand he is making a developing move, but on the other hand b7 remains undefended. And you can spot this double attack, that after queen b3, both of the pawns are being under attack and the opponent really does not have a way to defend. I mean, technically he could try to bamboozle us, maybe with a move like knight to c6. I think it's best try, saying, all right, go ahead, take on b7. I'm gonna try to take on d4, create counterplay. But I think the key idea on knight to c6 is just not to rush and calculate all these nonsense complications, but simply defend your pawn with a move like knight f3, because hey, his issues are still there. It's not like it's gonna run anywhere. Alright, so after spending a little bit of time, e6 was eventually played. I'm gonna stick with my simple move. I'm gonna be collecting the pawn and only move not to lose the rook. He plays knight to d7. Alright, now, potentially rook b8 could be annoying, and I can do two things here. I think the easiest in general, and you just know it's always gonna be a safe move, you can play queen to b3, okay? You just, let's say, played queen b3, capture on b7, it's like the biggest money heist of your life. Just make sure to get the heck out of there. You know, don't waste time jerking off on b7 for no reason. However, if you, let's say, put these things in balance and then you realize, well, maybe I can even combine development while keeping a very annoying queen, stopping rook b8, I think this move is even stronger. So, bishop to f4, simply developing while restricting our opponent from activating the rook. And then, yeah, simple moves to come, e3, knight f3, bishop perhaps on b5, could also ultimately land on e2, simple square, and get castled. And just, you know, make sure to double check every move, whether your queen could get in trouble, as long as you make sure that's pretty safe, really, you should be all good. So notice that he felt so uncomfortable that he even spent more time playing queen c8, which gives us an interesting decision, because on one hand our queen is very active, so it could make sense to try to keep it, but considering the fact that we have already won a pawn, I cannot stress this enough how crucial it is to start exchanging pieces when you are up in material. Now the only potential issue that I see with this is that after the trade, if we are careless, let's say e3, bishop b4 looks a little bit annoying. You know, just getting that pin, that threat to take the knight. I think ultimately, because we have at the very least a move such as knight e2, this should be fine. But yeah, just because I don't want to give him any sort of activity, I'm gonna be keeping the queen here. So I'm just gonna play queen to b3. Still, I think this played out quite nicely in our favor, Since rook b8 is still not a move, queen c8 is potentially a target. Just imagine something like rook c1, knight b5 could happen in the future, taking advantage of the queen immediately, and then potentially even rather like a knight for queen c7 would be quite juicy if you ask me. So yeah, I'm just gonna keep queen here, and apart from that, our plan very much remains the same. Get castled, get the rook on the open file, and then we're pretty much gonna try to take it from there. So okay, he plays a5, which is really a move that I don't like, just because he is breaking a fundamental rule in the opening, since he's not developing any pieces and just starts pushing pawns kind of aimlessly. It's not like a4 is a huge threat. Maybe he's just kind of dreaming of getting his bishop to b4 eventually. However, I don't see how that will really improve his situation. So yeah, I think I'm just gonna start with e3. I could do knight f3 as well, but this is kind of nice to, let's say, give yourself always this kind of safety net of having knight e2 just in case you really need it. So not sure we're actually gonna play it here, but just saying it would have been an option. So yeah, I think I'm just gonna do knight f3. Anyways, we can always defend with a move such as rook c1 if you feel the need to. And the next part of this, yeah, it's simply try to get castled, then we challenge the bishop, and we are gonna be having an endgame with an extra pawn on the queen side. Notice this 2-on-1 majority. Should be rather safe to convert. I could play bishop b5. I don't really see what this accomplishes though. It's not like I really want to give up my precious bishop for his not so active knight. Therefore, I'm just gonna make this somewhat humble bishop move, if you want to call it that way. But the bishop is definitely a very well placed piece, just defending the knight in case of anything. And okay, knight e4, creating a threat of, you know, takes, and then there's gonna be bishop takes with a fork. So we have two ways of dealing with this. We can either ignore, play a sigma male move, just mind our own business, and saying after knight c3 pawn takes, if he's taking with the queen, it feels kind of risky. You have to calculate though. So if you are in this rating range, I wouldn't recommend you calculate unnecessary lines. So I'm just gonna defend rook c1, and then my move is pretty simple. We're gonna be castling, breaking the pin, creating a threat to take, which is most likely gonna force him take, and therefore bring my pawn a little bit closer to the center. So yet, nothing crazy happening, but just trying to keep control over the position. Remember that we have already won a pawn, so we pretty much don't need to show anything in this game. Alright, it's already won. We just need to make common sense moves, try to keep our possession together, and then the game is gonna be slowly winning itself, because the closer you get to the end game, the more obvious your superiority will become, since any king and pawn endgame with an extra pawn, it's 99% a win. So there is that. Please keep that in mind. It's perhaps the best advice that I can give you, other than trying therapy. So he is just playing g5, targeting my bishop. Speaking of therapy, what is my opponent doing? Now, you know, here reflex would be, let's say, g5, I'm gonna defend. You know, it's like you have a very serious argument with your wife, and all of a sudden she plays g5. She brings an argument that happened like 3 years ago, and it's completely irrelevant. And you're like, oh yes, but you know, it wasn't really like that, and so on. And you lose the initiative. No, you have to deal with the actual problem. What is the actual problem? Well, there is a huge problem onto the pin. So please don't get a jump scare whenever you see something like g5. Try to keep your cold blood, and yeah, never go easy on your wife. Take on e4. Go here. Threatening to infiltrate. And okay, see, you just prove your point. Argument is over. Everybody is happy. Knight e4, he resigned. So, what happened here? What the heck did we just witness? Besides my nonsense talking 24/7. Well, you remember to play d4. And after this c4, you get a starting position for the Slav. We take that pawn on d5, because that's what the weird Romanian guy told you to do so. And then after knight c3, your plan is to, let's say, develop knights on their natural squares. So imagine he would have played something better, like knight f6. You could play, let's say, knight to f3, knight c6, bishop to f4. I think that's rather easy. Plan is a3. On bishop g4, you have knight e5. And if bishop f5, e6, there are these kind of queen b3 lines that are pretty tricky for our opponent to deal with. You can even play queen b3 earlier, like here. Quite an interesting move. So it's really up to you. I guess we'll go over more games like this in the future. This is quite topical for the exchange Slav. But make sure to really punish him when they are playing this mistake. Queen b3, I guess already quite annoying for my opponent to deal with. Yeah, I think it should be very bad already. Computer kind of underestimates black's issues, I would say. And yeah, just curious about our decision to keep queens. I played queen b3, which is kind of close. Computer is happy with the trade, but yeah, I wasn't sure if we have to like really give him this unnecessary activity. I knew that ultimately we should have all of these under control and defend and be okay. But I was like, wait a minute. He just lost a pawn. There is no way I'm giving him the initiative. Or at least some active moves. So I was like, fine, I get that. I'm gonna try to keep queens on here. I could potentially use queen as a target. That was one of my main arguments in this situation. And a5, typical mistake. We kept developing. But then he really made this big slip with g5, completely ignoring the problem. We have knight takes on e4, which just immediately forces resignation as the queen has to move. Then you could do whatever. Imagine like a knight d6 type of check already wins the queen. And if this, knight d6, white would have ended up with an extra piece. Therefore, that's why he resigned. So, thanks for watching and make sure to let me know in the comments what opening you want to see next on the channel. Take care.